All right, welcome everyone. Good morning. I'm Justin Cook with ESA, and I'm going to give you a few housekeeping reminders this morning as we start the symposium. And before I hand it off, see from Casper, one of our sponsors, who will say a few words and introduce our keynote speaker. Few items to go over. Exits are to your left out this door. I'm not sure what happens if you go out that door, but go out that door. Bathrooms are down the hall by the registration table. Please silence all your devices, but continue to use them. That's how we're going to ask questions through the Slido app. If you're feeling unwell, especially if you have a fever, please stay home. And also, there's been some actual stabbings in the area recently. And so we are just letting you know so that you could make sure to be careful out there in the evening. Don't travel alone. Try to avoid the park area, I'm told. And just be careful. So all the presentations are being live streamed on Feedloop, the app that we're using. If you have any issues or questions, please see Sandra or Olivia. If you're in person and if online, feel free to email them. They will be checking quite often. We have a full program today. We have a break following the keynote, and then we get into 4 different sessions throughout the day, with lunch being at 11:50, and we'll return at 1 p.m. Tomorrow we start at 8:30 again, and we have 3 sessions for you with lunch at 12:20. Please come to the award ceremony. It's actually at 4:50 p.m. It's going to be in this same room. And then it will be followed by a reception right outside these doors in the patio area. I want to thank UC Davis, Sandra, Olivia for putting this symposium on, as well as all of the planning committee members. It takes quite a bit of work throughout the year to put this together, not only taking into account feedback from last year's symposium, but coming up with new ideas, making sure that the sessions and topics are relevant, that we get the right speakers that you would want to hear from. So thank you all. Yep. Thank you, Denny. And thank you to our sponsors. So we have Casper, Kelsey's going to be speaking from them, Pasteur, Leach Tishman, Pioneer, and ESA. So thank you all for sponsoring this year. Asking questions. So there's 2 ways to do this. One way is through Feedloop. If you have that open, you're going to not click the live feed, just to avoid any issues there. But for each session, in the title, in the description of the session, there's a link to Slido for that particular session. So each session will have a different Slido link for asking questions. So you're going to click that link and you should be able to ask questions. The other alternative is you could go to Slido directly, and there's a particular code that will be on the screen for each session, I believe, Sandra, right? And in your program, and you could go direct that way. Now, if you have any questions, I'll be floating around for the first few sessions. I could help you out, or you could always go to the back and Sandra would help you. So please let us know. And with that, I'll welcome Kelsey to the front, and she'll say a few words and introduce our keynote. All right, thanks, Kelsey.
Justin, and welcome everyone to this year's A&E Symposium. I'd like to just echo what Justin said. Obviously, thank you to UC Davis for hosting again this year, and a special thank you to Sandra and Olivia and all their hard work putting this together. Our team is especially excited to be back again to be able to talk with you all. So it's no secret that the aviation industry is still on the rebound from the impacts of COVID-19. So while air travel is getting back to pre-COVID numbers, we're still seeing noise complaints on the rise. During this time, we saw a shift in executive air travel, and we finally had the opportunity to compare noise levels to a quiet airspace for the first time since the pre-jet era. So all of this led to several studies being done over the last couple of years, and it led to some very intriguing data. At Casper, we saw one major theme come up time and time again, which is NOMS systems are no longer for just large airports. Small airports have a need for them too. So as most of you remember, prior to the pandemic, the NOMS system, a complaint management system, was something really only the large players needed. The small GA executive airports, you could get away with manual reporting. Better yet, you didn't even need a dedicated noise office. The times are changing and you're all feeling it. So at Casper, we thought it was imperative to do our part to make that a possibility for you. So we look forward to being able to show you our small airport solutions. We offer monthly subscription models. These have automated complaint management and reporting functionality, and also some community-facing tools that really keep that line of communication open between airports and your communities. Overall, these NOM systems, which have historically been big player focused, but our scalable solutions really do fit the needs of the present day. So we're also proud to show off the redesign of our noise system. So even if you think you have seen it before, make sure you stop by our booth, see our new features and design. So we're excited to be able to talk with you all over the next couple of days, more about these solutions and everything else that we offer. We have our A team here with us. Two of our founders all the way from the Netherlands, Helene Erkamp and David Van de Velde are here. And of course, myself and Zach Miller, who head our US team. You can find us at our booth, but we'll also be in all of the sessions as well throughout the next couple of days. So we look forward to meeting with you and seeing you more. I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Don Scotta. Don is an aviation professional working in the US FAA Office of Environment and Energy and the Noise Division Manager. His current work is focused on managing the FAA's research and policy development regarding aircraft noise effects on individuals and communities, noise modeling, metrics and environmental data visualization, and noise reduction, abatement, and mitigation. Don spends his time focused on addressing challenging questions, ranging in topics from FAA's noise policy review to new entrants. Prior to joining the FAA, Don worked as an aviation management, aviation planning, and environmental consultant, focused on meeting the needs of FAA and airport clients throughout the US. Don holds an MS in Air Transportation Management from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a BS in Aviation Management with Flight from the Florida Institute of Technology. Additionally, Don holds a single multi-engine instrument commercial pilot certificate and was a certified flight instructor. So welcome, Don.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning. Thanks to Justin and the program committee to UC Davis for inviting me to speak with you all. And before I get started, I usually like to ask the audience a question. So I'm going to do that with you all this morning. How many of you have seen the Federal Register notice that we posted yesterday, Friday, but officially yesterday? So most of you know that happened. I'm going to be spending most of the time talking through that with you all this morning, and then I do wrap up the end of the conversation with a little bit about climate and sustainable aviation fuels. But as just to point out in the beginning, that's not my area of expertise. So I'll do the best I can if you have questions on those topics, but just please know that that's not my area of expertise. Do I click the slides, Sandra, or yes? Okay. Here we go. Great. So as far as the agenda, I have a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to talk through with you most of the time with you on noise. I'm going to provide some context and background, provide a quick update, a reminder on the neighborhood environmental survey results, and share with you all a summary of the comments that we received on our noise research Federal Register notice. And then I'll talk with you about our noise policy review that we kicked off yesterday with the publication of our Federal Register notice. And as I mentioned, we'll wrap up with some discussion about climate and sustainable aviation fuels. So, the theme of the conference this week is adapting for tomorrow today. And I thought that was a really great topic and was really pleased to be invited to speak with you all, because I see a lot of the work that we're doing in my office, the Office of Environment and Energy at FAA, is really doing those things. We do a lot of research, and I'll talk to you about some of the research that we do, but we don't do research for research's sake. We do research to inform policy decisions, to inform where we're heading with the system and how we can make it better and more efficient. So action's important as well, especially when we can use that research as an enabler. We're also aware that change isn't always easy, and I think that's a topic that's going to come up as we discuss the Federal Register notice on our noise policy review. There's a lot of ideas out there, and many of them are going to result in could result in change, but that change may not be easy for everyone, and I think it's important to keep that in mind as we have these discussions. So anyway, I think you'll find that the sort of theme that we're going through today, or at this conference, can be summarized in the different topics that I'm going to talk with you all about. So as we get started, I thought I'd share with you all our environment and energy strategy that we have at FAA. First, our mission is to understand, manage, and reduce the environmental impacts of global aviation through research, technological innovation, policy, and outreach to benefit the public. And our vision is to remove environmental constraints on aviation growth by achieving quiet, clean, and efficient air transportation. This slide here shows a little bit about our environment and energy program. And you can see on the left, we do lots of research to advance our understanding of noise, emissions, and their impacts. We look at vehicle operation, pollutants, how that propagates societal impacts. And we've created a tool suite called Aviation Environmental Design Tool to help model those impacts. We look at the modernization of our fleet, looking at drones, commercial supersonic aircraft, commercial space vehicles, and we try to apply those things with our policy making. We look at domestic policy. We work on aircraft and engine standards. We've worked to create the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation through ICAO, the CORSIA. We have long-term goals, and we work on community engagement. And we're working to develop innovative solutions to reduce noise and emissions through reducing noise and emissions at the source through technologies, through sustainable aviation fuels, and optimizing operations and procedures. We do a lot of this research through the Aviation Sustainability Center, what we call ASCENT. And you can see the link up there to ascent.aero. All the research that we have going on through ASCENT is at that website. We have a program called CLEAN, Continuous Lower Energy Emissions and Noise, where we partner with industry to accelerate the implementation of new technologies into the fleet. And then we work with CAFE as well as the Volpe Center to do some of this research. So now digging a little bit into the noise policy review. So right here, the slide shows, I guess it's entitled "The Noise Problem Then and Now." Historically, noise issues, we all know, have been really airport centric. They're focused on infrequent operations, dispersed flight paths, and very loud jet aircraft. Noise concerns have been historically raised by communities near the airport. And, historically, the impacts were around the relatively low cadence of loud aircraft separated by long intervals. But today, the noise problem is both more of an airspace or overflight noise issue and somewhat near airports. There's more frequent operations. There's concentrated flight paths. Their aircraft are quieter than they were in the past. They're not quiet, but they're quieter than they used to be. And noise concerns are raised by corridor communities further from airports more than they were in the past. And we're also starting to hear and are aware of the introduction of new operational models using advanced air mobility aircraft and drones has the potential to have additional noise impacts. So this slide here shows sort of three different pictures. The picture on the left is around the Boston Logan Airport, where you can see the 65 DNL noise contour around the airport. The red lines are departures, the green lines are arrivals, and the blue dots are unique complaints that we received. And this picture does a good job telling the story about how the complaints that we're receiving, the people that have concerns about aviation noise, are no longer right next to the airport, but they've moved further out. And this is sort of what we're seeing now. In addition, the middle figure shows sort of how the noise has changed over time. Back in the 70s, you can see, we had relatively quieter events, and it didn't take as many airplanes to reach a level of significant noise, to reach 65 DNL. You could do it with 10 events a day if they were pretty loud. Now we know aircraft are quieter. And it takes more events to do that. So you might see someone with 100 events a day or so in that neighborhood to get to 65. And one of the things that we're contemplating is, as we see new entrants enter the fleet and drone operations and advanced air mobility operations come online, we're aware that this could continue further, that there could be another increase in quieter activity that could potentially still have impacts. And then the figure on the right is just another way of showing sort of what's been happening over time. So the red line in this shows the population exposed to 65 DNL back from the mid 70s to today. And back in the mid 70s, it was around 7 million people. And now we're around 440,000 people exposed to that level of noise. At the same time, the level of employments has grown significantly or substantially, as you can see. Let's see, it was about 200 million annual employments, and now we're almost a billion annual employments. So, one way of looking at this slide, and I know you all would probably not take this view, is that we've done a great job solving the noise problem, but at the same time, we all know that that's not true, right? We know that there's a lot of people that are still exposed to noise, but these kind of figures show that we've come a long way, but there's a long way to go. And I think that's sort of the context that I wanted to sort of start off with as we talk about this noise policy review that we're kicking off. But before I get there, a little bit about the Neighborhood Environmental Survey as a refresher. Back in 2021, we published a Federal Register notice sharing the results of sharing about our noise research program. And substantially, the main element in that was the sharing of the Neighborhood Environmental Survey results. The Neighborhood Environmental Survey results support an observed increase in annoyance from aircraft noise. It shows a substantial increase in annoyance for the population living in the vicinity of airports, and the increase in annoyance is generally consistent across various levels of noise. You can see that substantial change by comparing the level of annoyance at 65 DNL in both curves. The Schultz curve on the left shows a level of about 10%, while the new national curve on the right shows more than 60% people are highly annoyed at that same level of exposure. So as we had the Federal Register notice for our research program open, we received over 4,000 comments in response to that Federal Register notice. The next few slides are going to present a summary of that data. This is the data that we're using sort of that started us off on the path of doing a noise policy review. This map depicts a map of distinct commenters by city. The size of the blue circle denotes the number of commenters. So the larger of the circle, that just is a sort of visual way of showing that there were more commenters from that general area. So I'll leave that up there for a second for you all to see. As a part of our analysis of comments, we tagged each comment according to the themes we saw. Each comment could have more than one tag. So the numbers aren't going to add up to 4,000, I guess is the point, the main takeaway there. When looking at the distribution of subtopics for additional research, the highest number of tags suggested that the FAA should take what we've learned through the Neighborhood Environmental Survey and begin considering updates to our noise policy, which is exactly what we're doing now. As we look at the distribution of subtopics for noise metrics and thresholds, we find that the highest number of tags suggest that the FAA should use additional existing metrics, notably number above, which counts the number of aviation noise events over a certain location and decibel level to better reflect the noise impacts on communities. In addition, other highly tagged suggestions were for us to consider using metrics in addition to DNL and also consider changing our noise thresholds. We're considering all of those suggestions as a part of our noise policy review. As we look at tags associated with subtopics for noise policy, we see the highest tag suggestion was for FAA to provide a timely roadmap for changing its noise regulations and use the NES as the new basis for decision-making on community impacts. And secondly, to update our noise policy based on the Neighborhood Environmental Survey. That's the process that we started on Monday that we're in right now. And I think now is a good time to switch gears and start digging into the overview of our noise policy. So here is just a sort of the introduction to the policy review. In late 2021, we initiated the review of our noise policy as a part of our ongoing commitment to address aircraft noise. This effort's building on our work to advance the scientific understanding of noise impacts, as well as the development of analytical tools and technologies. We're considering new evidence from our noise research program, including the Neighborhood Environmental Survey and the distribution of environmental risks, trade-offs, or externalities across communities. Our goals are really twofold: to identify and implement well-reasoned, scientifically grounded policy updates that incorporate updated understanding of noise and human response, and the development of analytical tools and technologies to better manage and reduce impacts of aviation. And also, we want to conduct an inclusive, transparent, and participatory process that prioritizes inputs from substantially affected stakeholders, including local communities. I'm sure many of you look at that 2021 date starting, saying that's when we started, and wondering, look at your clock and say, or the calendar and say that we're in 2023 right now. So what happened? What happened is it took a fair bit of effort for us to organize ourselves and decide the way that we wanted to go about doing this project. So it took us about a little bit more than a year to get to the point where we are today, working on framing what we've shared in our Federal Register notice, what we shared in the framing paper that was just made available, I think, this morning, if you haven't seen it yet. But there was a link in the Federal Register notice about that as well. So it does take a little bit of time for us to organize ourselves and to prepare for these things. And we wanted to make sure that we were well prepared before we started engaging with our stakeholders. So as far as the scope of the noise policy review, we're focused on the foundational elements of our noise policy. That it really it includes metrics and thresholds. We're taking a hard look at DNL, and we're also considering other metrics such as number above, as I mentioned already, and how we're calculating those things. We're also looking at noise thresholds. Considering the NES findings and other research, we're investigating lowering our thresholds below 65 DNL and the definition of significant noise exposure for actions subject to environmental review requirements, and modifying the definitions of levels of noise exposure that are deemed to be normally compatible with airport operations, as set forth in Table 1 of Appendix A to Part 150. For new metrics, we're considering whether it's appropriate to establish a noise threshold, and if so, what that potential value could be. So most of you raised your hand, so this isn't news, but for those of you that didn't, we published a Federal Register notice for inspection last Friday. It was officially published yesterday, Monday, May 1st. That publication on Monday opened a 90-day comment period that will end on July 31st of 2023. The Federal Register notice includes a background on our noise policy, and it requests comments on 11 specific questions that we've sort of framed to help provide input on the things that we're considering. It also links to a companion framing paper. If you tried to see that before today, took a day or so to get that up on our website, but it should be available now. If it's not up now, it is. I've been told by our web folks it'll be up today. So that is available. And a little bit about the framing papers on the next slide. The paper is entitled "The Foundational Elements of the Federal Aviation Civil Aviation Noise Policy, the Noise Measurement System, its Component Noise Metrics, and Noise Thresholds." We designed the framing paper to be read in parallel with the Federal Register notice. It provides additional context and discussion around the 11 questions included in the Federal Register notice, and it's aimed at providing context for the review, and it's aimed to help stakeholders better understand the questions included in the Federal Register notice. So I already mentioned the sort of scope of the review, but I thought it would be worth spending a minute unpacking some of the policy options that we're considering. So the FAA has defined a broad policy option space that will meet our goals, our primary objectives of incorporating our updated understanding of aviation noise and human response, and the development of analytical tools and technologies to better manage and reduce the environmental impacts of aviation. One policy option under consideration is transitioning away from our current noise policy that uses a single metric, DNL, and a single impact criterion, DNL 65 dB, for all evaluations, whether they're new projects, land use compatibility planning, et cetera, and regardless of the vehicle type and operating scenario. You can see here, we're looking at sort of learning to taking these things into account, such as aircraft, helicopters, rockets, new entrants, looking at why we're doing an analysis such as environmental review, whether there's land use planning and eligibility requirements, and then the type of analysis, airfield changes, airspace changes, doing things to accommodate new entrants. These are some of the things that we're considering. The FAA can explore an expanded system that might include accounting for cumulative, operational, single event, and impulsive metrics for use alone, in combination, or in lieu of another metric. A companion metric is a noise metric that is used in conjunction with another noise metric, such as DNL, for decision-making. An alternative metric is a noise metric that is used in lieu of another metric, such as DNL, for decision-making. We're also looking at, as I mentioned, considering options that account for differences in vehicle types, locations, resources affected, the purpose of the analysis, and types of analysis. We're reviewing many metrics that could be considered as a part of this new system, including both cumulative metrics, such as traditional DNL or CNEL, but also other cumulative metrics, such as an 8-hour day, which could be used to evaluate school and works settings. We will also review a range of operational single event metrics, including number above, time above, LMAX, and others that might be suggested through stakeholder comment. Finally, we're working closely with our Office of Commercial Space to evaluate metrics that are more appropriate for low frequency or impulsive noise, such as commercial space launches. As we all know, DNL is not necessarily the best way to talk about those impacts. The most appropriate metric could depend on the purpose of the analysis, the audience, and several other factors. Changes to DNL could include changes to adjusting the threshold, averaging technique, and/or changing the way or changing nighttime weightings. DNL with additional supplemental metrics could be used together. Number above, or NA, answers how often will the aircraft level meet or exceed a certain level. Time above, or TA, answers how long will the sound last at or above a certain level. Time above and number above break the DNL metric into its component parts to help explain the noise and absolute noise exposure in a different way. Our policy review will look at elements of DNL by unpacking how it's calculated and evaluating alternatives. For example, we'll look at peak operational months and perhaps seasonal variation, for example, at the resort airports that have increased use in the summer. We will also examine existing significance thresholds and consider whether we want to keep the current threshold, 65, with no change, whether we want to set a threshold for any, some, or all of the noise metrics in the system, whether we want to change the metric and level used to define the threshold of significance and reportable impacts, or we want to revise the metric and level used to define compatible land use and noise sensitive uses. We also commit to reviewing this noise policy regularly to determine whether updates or revisions are necessary to respond to any new research. We have ongoing research looking at health impacts, sleep disturbance, but that research isn't mature yet. It's not finalized. We don't have that information available. We don't want to create a new policy that's not able to take on new information as it matures. The noise policy review could have a number of potential outcomes. It could result in FAA updating our regulations, our orders, guidance, et cetera. For example, we might revise the threshold of noise sensitive land use compatibility for Part 150 or environmental reviews. It might also provide additional guidance on how to prepare those documents. It could result in different levels of analysis and review for a particular action, such as a change in flight procedure. And it could result in identifying a better way to communicate with the public about the effects of aviation noise. While this policy review is an important step for the FAA to take, it's critical that we're transparent and clear about the effect any policy changes could have on existing noise exposure. There are some things that will not be affected by any policy changes being conducted in this review. Changes in policy alone will not reduce noise exposure. For future environmental reviews, a change in policy could result in a different outcome that may have reduced impacts, depending on what alternatives are available and what specific federal action are being considered. The proposed policy changes we are talking about here will not change where and when aircraft currently fly. However, just as I mentioned, future decisions could take into account the new policy and may result in less impactful outcomes. And finally, policy changes will not require the FAA to redo, hold on one second. Redo any of our environmental analyses or decisions that have been made. Future environmental reviews completed after any policy changes were implemented could take into account any of these changes. So again, I want to make sure that I'm being very clear with this. The way that I think it's best to think about what this policy change is not going to be able to do. It's not the same thing. Reducing our noise thresholds, changing our metrics is not the same thing as turning down the volume on a radio. So we're not going to be able to affect the lived experience that people are having through this project, but it is going to have the ability to potentially affect the level of review, and will definitely have the potential to help us discuss noise impacts with our stakeholders and with communities in a clearer way. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about engagement. We've just recently published a landing page for our noise policy review. You can find it by going to faa.gov/noise policy review. The landing page will be revised as the policy review progresses. The content on that landing page will include things like the noise policy review information and status, the framing paper, which, as I mentioned, should be up there now or will be coming very shortly. It'll have resources such as educational material, videos, FAQs, primary sources, etc. Right now it has links to join our virtual webinars that have been scheduled. And also at the bottom, it has a link to subscribe to the page so that you get an email anytime we add anything to that website. So you don't have to go back and check. You'll get notified when that happens. A lot of this material is being put up, as we speak. I know the videos that provide some context and information are on there, going through the process of being posted. So we're hopeful that the additional materials are coming online in the coming days. As I mentioned, we've scheduled some noise policy review webinars. Right now, we have 4 scheduled on Tuesday, May 16th, Thursday, May 18th, Tuesday, May 23rd, and Thursday, May 25th. We've scheduled the times, as you can see, they're at different times, so that we have basically various times across the country. We have a couple in the afternoon and evening on the East Coast and the afternoon on the evening on the West Coast. And our hope is that those options give as many people as interested ability to attend. The structure of the webinars will be such that we'll have starting off with a presentation to share information with the attendees, and then we'll shift into a question and answer format. So we're available to answer questions that anyone has on the topic. We're going to be recording all of the webinars, and they will be available on YouTube afterwards. So there'll be webinars 1, 2, 3, and 4 available. And to attend, you don't need to register. You just have to click the link on our website. You can click the link in the slides. And I'm told that we can accommodate up to 4,000 people per webinar at each session through Zoom, and there's an unlimited number of people that can attend on the YouTube live stream. So we're very hopeful that that's enough capacity. But if we find it's not, we'll do what we can to accommodate more through additional webinars. We've also created an email box for anyone to ask for additional information on the noise policy review. That email address is noisepolicyreview@faa.gov. We have a phone number that you could call if you have questions. I highly recommend using the email address if you have questions. It's a lot easier for us to keep track of. But if you have any information, this is not a place to submit comments. All comments that are submitted to us for this project have to be submitted to the docket on regulations.gov, and that has instructions and a link to do that in the notice itself. Emails will not be put onto the docket. This is for additional information. If you don't understand something, you have a question about something, feel free to reach out to us there. Do not send comments to the noise policy review email address. They will not be considered. And we will, if we see anyone sending us comments that way, we will reply and let them know that they need to put them, submit them formally on the docket. All comments that are submitted on the docket are publicly available, and everyone can see what everyone posts. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. As I promised, I was going to wrap up with a little bit of information on climate and sustainable fuels. So I guess to start off the next two topics, I wanted to highlight again our Aviation Sustainability Center of Excellence. That's since 2004, we've relied on University Center of Excellence to help us do research, to build a pipeline of people that are passionate about environmental issues in aviation. And in 2013, we added to the scope of our Center of Excellence to include jet fuels. The portfolio covers a broad range of topics on alternative fuels, emissions, noise, operations, and helping with our analytical tools. We're approaching 100 research projects with over $35 million annual budget for over $130 million in total investment. And you can see the picture on the right-hand side, there's a number of universities that participate. And we also have support from a number of organizations in addition to FAA that support us through funding and resources. So looking at climate, we're in an era of increased ambition, and we've set a goal of net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. The United States has published in 2021, we published our climate action plan that set that goal for United States to be net zero GHG from aviation by 2050. In 2019, the global airlines set net zero targets, and in October of 22, 193 member states for ICAO set a long-term aspirational goal for net zero emissions by 2050. In the United States, our aviation climate goal is shown up here. To be effective, the goal should be clear, achievable, and ambitious with specific actions that can be taken to achieve it. The goal outlined below contributes to broader objective to achieve net zero GHG emissions economy-wide through 2050. If you haven't seen that document, it's available online. I don't think I have a link to it here, but it's easily found if you search for the U.S. Climate Action Plan. And then looking at sustainable aviation fuels, we have the SAF Grand Challenge Roadmap up here. It's a multi-agency plan to define needs for the next decade to enable sustainable aviation fuel goals. There's 6 action areas: feedstock innovation, conversion technology innovation, building supply chains, policy and valuation analysis, enabling end use, communicating progress, and building support. There's 26 work streams with 139 activities, and there's timeframes from 2022 to 2030 and 2030 to 2050. It was released at the Global Clean Energy Action Forum on September 23rd, 2022. It's the result of data-driven planning. You can see this is just a couple shots of some examples of information that an analysis that we've done to support it. Our analysis of the United States aviation CO2 emissions in 2019, and then the domestic and international aviation CO2 emissions. You can see here on the bottom the contributions of different elements to help us get to that goal. And then I think this is the last slide. So the Inflation Reduction Act was a new sustainable aviation fuel tax credit and grant program. SAF tax credits provide a 2-year incentive for those who blend SAF and sold or used starting in January of 23. SAF must achieve more than 50% GHG reduction to be eligible, and it must be certified in accordance with CORSIA or similar methodologies that satisfy the Clean Air Act criteria. The tax credit starts at $1.25 per gallon of neat SAF and can increase up to $1.75 per gallon. Section 13704 Clean Fuel Production Credit is a subsequent 3-year incentive for those who produce SAF sold or used starting in January of 2025. The grant program is for new SAF projects and technology grants. It's $297 million to establish a competitive grant program for eligible entities to carry out projects located in the United States. $244.5 million for projects related to production, transportation, blending, or storage of SAF. $46.5 million for projects to develop and demonstrate or apply low emission aviation technologies, and $5.9 million for program oversight. We're developing 2 programs: Fueling Aviation's Sustainable Transition, Fast SAF, and Fast Tech. Those are the 2 programs. And then I think my last slide is for you all to just have as reference. It's a list of acronyms. I did my best to pull them out as I was going, but I know it's impossible sometimes to use to avoid it. So I put that in there just in case. So thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to answer any of your questions. I think we're using, Justin's gonna, yeah, okay.
Okay, let's see if I got this right here. All right, the first question is, what is the FAA doing to ensure an independent, fair, and balanced noise policy review process?
Independent, fair, and balanced. I think, well, the way that we're going about it, I think, shows our interest in doing that by, I guess it's something that I can say to be clear up front. So far, we've made no decisions on any policy direction. Right now, we're at a point where we did some thinking about the things that we want input on, but no decisions have been made. So at this point, as we start the public comment period, we have not made decisions on where we're going to go with potential policy changes, and we're relying on input from our stakeholders to sort of help us see where we should go in those general areas. It'll be a transparent process because all of the comments we received are going to be available online. We're going to summarize them, just like I did and shared with you all for our noise research Federal Register notice. And we're going to be coming back around after we've considered all the input we received with another Federal Register notice that's going to share our recommended policy changes. And then after that's done, basically what we would do is identify potential changes that we need to make and how we would go about doing that. And depending on what we change and how it needs to change, there will be sort of another round of participatory processes. If we have to update our NEPA order, there's a process that we go through that includes public involvement to go through that. If we have to do a regulation change, there's notice and comment rulemaking that's associated with it. So throughout the process, starting with this stakeholder engagement, the comment period, we intend to be transparent and participatory.
Thank you. Along similar lines, I guess understanding the FAA took over a year to frame the noise policy review process. Are you open to an extended period of time for comments, 120 or 180 days instead of 90 days?
I think that's a great question. And I think when we started off this process, to take a step back, when we did the noise research Federal Register notice, we started with a 60-day comment period. And as we were closing in on the end of that, we received requests from stakeholders for an additional 30 days. And I think what ended up happening, because takes a little bit of doing to extend one, it actually closed and then reopened for another 30 days. So we were able to give that extra time. At this point, we're on the second day of the comment period, and a lot of the feedback that we've been getting sort of throughout the process is that people want this process to go quickly, and they don't want us to take too long. At the same time, I understand that we're asking people to consider basically a policy that hasn't been updated substantially for 40 or 50 years. And it may take time for folks to think about the recommendations they want to make, write them down, down, maybe get them vetted by their organizations, and have them submitted. So I would like to say, if we start hearing that more time is needed, we're open to considering an extension. We're on day 2, so I'm certainly not in a position to say that we are going to extend it. We really have to see how the process plays out. But that email address that I shared, if you all find that you're coming up, towards the end, a month out, and there's no way that you're going to get your comments in time, please do let us know, because we will have the ability, if needed, to take longer. Just understand, maybe I'm not going to get a question on that, but how long is it going to take us to make recommendations? So that's largely going to be related to how many comments we get and how long the comment period is. So keep that in mind when extensions are requested, please.
That was another question, is your timeline after, so.
All right, well, I can speak a little more about that.
Yeah,
Thanks,
if you
Justin.
could,
So,
yeah.
So that it is a great question, and that's sort of the one that we've been getting. Even as we've started, we've said we've been working on this process. This is the beginning of our stakeholder engagement part of it. But everyone wants to know, when are we going to get through this process? And the answer is, truly, I don't know. I'd like to go quickly. I'd like us to be able to move through this process and have something done in relatively quick time frame. But what's more important to me than doing it quickly is to doing it well, and to make sure that we're getting the input from our stakeholders and having time to consider it as we develop recommendations. So when we did the Federal Register notice for our noise research, we read every single one of those 4,000 comments that we received. And I intend to do the same thing for this notice as well. If we get another 4,000, that's a certain amount of time to read through. If we get 10,000 or 20,000 comments, you can imagine it's going to take us a little bit more time to read through those comments. So I'm not able to commit to a time frame, because I don't know how long the comment period will be. I know right now it's 90 days, and I don't know how many comments we're going to get. Just know that we will read all of them, and we will consider everything that we're given.
Thank you. Will you be reviewing the underlying scientific and statistical validity of DNL?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think we're saying as we go through this process, we're taking a hard look at DNL to see whether it still makes sense for us to use as our decision-making metric, or whether we should be adding to that. So as a part of it, we're certainly looking into all the elements or the components of DNL, whether the averaging makes sense. If we're using an average annual day, should we be looking at another way of averaging for DNL? So, we're taking a hard look at it.
All right, can you describe FMCS role in the NPR, and have they interviewed any external stakeholders to date?
Absolutely. So for those of you, I don't think that's on my list of acronyms. FMCS is the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. They're a federal partner that we're working with to help us with the federal, or with our noise policy review. They came on board our team to sort of help us initially design the process by which we would complete the review. And that meant, the way that process started off was they spoke with a whole bunch of people inside the FAA to build an understanding of the sort of agency's understanding of what our noise policy is and how we work as an agency. And then together with FMCS, we developed a approach for doing this review. We created an internal FAA sort of team that was focused on this project, and FMCS has been helping us by facilitating a lot of the internal discussions that we've been having to sort of get to the point where we had a set of policy options that we could put in a Federal Register notice to seek feedback from you all. So that's how they've been helping us, and they're going to continue to do that with us. The second part of the question was, have they interviewed or spoken with anyone outside the agency? As far as I know, they have not, because, as I just said, we're starting off yesterday was when we began the stakeholder involvement process. So they have not done any engagements with anyone outside the FAA.
Okay, this is a two-part question. Could a new FAA noise policy affect initial environmental reviews that often result in CADX decisions? And then the second part is, could initial reviews be more rigorous?
So, when I'm not familiar with the term initial environmental review, do you know what that means? Or
I'm assuming it's during the
Like a screening
this
sort of environmental
screening.
review? Okay, so what's going to happen, depending on how what we end up deciding to change and how it's implemented, it's certainly possible that there'll be more considerations when someone's doing an initial review or looking at a CADX. If we change our noise threshold, if we add metrics, there potentially could be other things that would need to be considered with regards to extraordinary circumstances or whether a CADX is appropriate given a different threshold. So it definitely has the potential to affect those sorts of things. How it plays out, that's several steps down the road, so I can't say for certain.
What efforts are being made to assess the health impacts of repetitive noise, for example, on cardiovascular health and other stress medicated health disorders?
It's a great question. And it's a great opportunity for me to share with you a little bit of the ongoing research that we had. I mentioned, we want to create a policy that's flexible and can be updated as research matures. And two of the research topics that I was thinking of when I said that were our research on cardiovascular disease and sleep impacts. Boston University is a part of our Ascent Center of Excellence, is doing research on cardiovascular disease and health impacts associated with aircraft noise. They're taking data from longitudinal health cohorts, such as Nurses Health Study, and looking at noise exposure to those nurses that were in that program to see whether noise had an effect on certain health incomes. And they're taking in account of all sorts of other elements that could have contributed to that as well. That's research that was in our recent FAA reauthorization that Congress asked us to share a report with them when the research is finalized. So this is something, that is very important. The research is progressing very well, and we're hoping that it's wrapped up soon. Sort of in an initial stage, we've recently funded additional research to add an additional health cohorts from that to that sort of research project, and we've also added the topic of mental health outcomes. So we're expanding the scope of that so that those researchers will be able to look at whether repeated noise has impacts on mental health, or if it has mental health effects. In addition, we're doing a study we call the National Sleep Study. That's a study where we're looking at impacts on aviation activity on sleep. It's a pretty neat approach for doing a study. We're mailing, for those volunteers that want to participate, and there's a series of criteria that one has to meet to be able to do so. We're sending some equipment to their home that they will use for a week to look to sort of help us see whether the noise exposure that they're experiencing in that time causes additional awakening. So will have a sound level meter in their room, and they'll have some medical equipment attached to their bodies to measure their response to noise. We'll be using the sound level meter and the recording to correlate awakenings, if there are any, to different kinds of noise. We'll be able to tell if it was their dog barking versus an airplane flying overhead if there's an awakening. And this is really neat because it's actually using the physiological data from recorded from their bodies to do that research. It's not necessarily solely based on someone saying I was woken up at night. It's what the readings actually show. And the last thing is another research project that we're just getting started with now, and it's using the concept is to whether we are able to use the sort of idea of active noise canceling to help reduce noise exposure during people's sleep. So the University of Pennsylvania, it has a lab where they're going to bring people in and do some lab studies where they're going to play various aircraft noises over a period of a week and determine whether playing sort of actively canceling out that noise has a positive or no benefit to people that are exposed to aircraft noise. So there's a number of things that we're looking at in that area, and I could probably go on.
All right. With regard to the reviewing, reevaluating metrics and thresholds, are we looking into factors such as broadband spectrum frequency components or considerations?
I think, that's an interesting question. I think, as part of the notice, the part of the questions that we asked, we're asking for additional information or studies or data that we should be considering. And those are great examples. If someone knows of things that we should be considering, sharing that with us as a part of a comment to the Federal Register notice on the docket would be very welcome.
For the NPR, will the FAA recognize that aviation noise needs to be assessed in ways that are different than other transportation noise? If so, how?
Well, I can't tell you how it's going to result at this point because we don't know yet. All I can say, and I can promise you, as I said already, we're going to review every single comment that we receive. If someone has a suggestion that we do so, then that will be considered. So it's going to be largely related to the input that we receive. If anyone has a desire to ask us to consider that, then please submit a comment.
Well, I know there's a number of other queued up questions here, but I think we're at time, Don. So I want to thank everyone. But I assume you will be around for the entire symposium.
I'm here all day today, all day tomorrow. And two of my colleagues, Adam Schulten and Susuma Shirama. Adam and Susuma, do you want to wave? They're here as well. So feel free to come speak with us if you have any other questions. Thank you.